Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. We're getting very close to wrapping up A Little Night Music, and this always feels weird because at the start of the season, I'm always like, this is going to take a long time. And then the final three songs seem to zip right by. But we have a couple of heavy hitters to finish off this season. This week, of course, it's The Miller's Son. A song that did not start out as a favorite, but has kind of slowly been creeping up my personal list of favorite Sondheim songs. Just a note on my conversation with Jared O'Rourke today, but because Jared was moving and couldn't find his headphones, you'll hear me on his computer speakers a few times throughout this conversation, but for the vast majority, you'll probably not notice. Also, I realized in the editing of this episode, they don't make something specifically clear. There's a lyric, two lyrics actually, that mention Trip the Light Fandango and then talking about the quick fantastic. The reason I'm so obsessed with diving into those lines is that when I think of those phrases, I immediately think of the 60s and 70s. Obviously, when this show was written, but not when this show is taking place. So I thought it was an interesting thing. But then what I discovered is that those phrases are actually much, much older. And I found that fascinating. So just in case you're wondering why I'm spending so much time on those lines specifically, that's the why behind my mania. But before we get into my conversation with Jared, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon, the triumphant quartet of Jack, Todd, Barry, and Carrie. And now it's time for Plodding Along. Plot Along is, of course, the part of the show where I tell you what is going on in the plot. So we're nearing the end of the show as the different couples meet, break up, and sometimes re-meet. Petra, who is the maid for Frederick and Anne, is seen with Madame Armfeldt's attendant, Frid, in her lap. She soon takes center stage to state her observations about love and life. Talking about love and life, I'd like to give a belated happy birthday to Bernadette Peters, who turned 73 this week, and she makes my life so much greater, better, warm. She's great. I love her so much. So happy birthday to her. Let me go thank some sponsors, and then when we return, it'll be me talking with Jared O'Rourke about The Miller's Son. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation, proudly supporting community needs for 65 years. When you make a gift to the Calgary Foundation, it's a gift that keeps on giving. The Foundation's knowledgeable staff will provide advice on the community's most pressing needs, keeping your interests at heart and helping you give back in a way that's meaningful for you. Your contributions are invested in an endowment fund that provides a permanent source of funding, allowing you to make an impact now and forever. If you're a professional advisor creating a giving plan for a client or a donor wanting to give back to the community, discover a wealth of resources at calgaryfoundation.org to learn more, or check out Calgary Foundation's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channel. This week we're also brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, so let's listen to one of our other great shows.
I'd like to get more reading done, and joining a book club seems like a good idea, but I don't know.
Why not?
Reading a whole book in a month, that's pretty daunting.
What if it was just a chapter, say a week?
That doesn't sound too bad. Still, getting together with a bunch of people, that's a whole evening.
Well, what if it was only half an hour, whenever you wanted to?
That would be great.
The Read Along, a mini book club for your ears.
Join my wife Anita
and my husband Scott
as we take you on a journey through a good book,
one chapter at a time.
A proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network,
locally grown,
community supported.
Available right now on your podcatcher of choice.
I shall marry the miller's son. Pin my hat on a nice piece of property. Friday
Jared O'Rourke, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Hello, thank you.
You are a brand new guest on this show, so I think it's only appropriate that we start off by asking you, where are you, dialing in from, and what are you up to?
I am dialing in from Cincinnati, Ohio. And right now I am trying to put a house together because I just bought a house and moved in, and no one told me it would be this hard to put it all together.
Now, are you moving into Cincinnati, or were you moving within Cincinnati?
No, I'm from Arkansas, from Little Rock, Arkansas, moved to Florida, worked there for a while, and then moved here. And Texas. My dad would kill me if I don't mention Texas, of course. And then moved up to Ohio about 3 years ago. And I love Cincinnati so much that it's the first time I thought, I'm going to buy a house and settle down. And all of the things that we think were going to happen actually are happening now.
Now, I guess if you're relatively new there, I was going to ask, what is the theater scene like in Cincinnati? But do you have an answer for that?
Oh, I do. It's insanely strong. So the city, I have fallen in love with the city. I know all about its history. So it's old. It's like from 1700s for America, old. And what I think is so powerful about that is it's developed its arts. It's back when the arts are really strong in a city. And this city has really preserved its art. So it's got 3 professional companies. One is the Cincinnati Playhouse. It's won 2 Tony Awards as Best Regional Theater. Several of their shows have gone on to Broadway, and then a couple of other theaters, Ensemble Theater and Shakespeare Theater Company, both of them very well respected, well known, not only within the community, but without. So it's a much stronger community than I think one would think of when they hear the word Cincinnati, but it has a long artistic history.
The other thing that I like to ask people when it's their first time on is, what was your first introduction to Stephen Sondheim?
Do you want to know? I knew you were going to ask me this. The answer, although the answer I want to give is Into the Woods, because I was about 16 years old, and I remember my father actually buying that recording for me because I wanted it. The truth of the matter is it's West Side Story. I just didn't know who Stephen Sondheim was. So I was about 7 or 8 years old, and my grandmother showed me West Side Story. And so that was technically my introduction to Stephen Sondheim. But it was Into the Woods that actually is when I went, who is this man? What has he done? What does he continue to doing? So it was really Into the Woods that got me started.
And was that the video version, or was this a live production you
I heard the Broadway cast. I didn't even know there was a video version available at that time. And I remember, I don't know why I'm sharing this, but I remember my father listened to it first. I remember him going, he's from Texas, so he's like, I bought it, let me hear it first. And he he put the headphones on, and he's like, I don't know, everyone's talking about something they wish for, and he handed me the headphones back. And from then on, I was just attached to Into the Woods.
That's awesome. I like that. I don't know how you feel about this. I've never really brought this up before, but there was a part of me when I was growing up, because I was so into show music rather than the popular music of the day. There's these themes, and there's sometimes swearing and stuff that happens in cast albums, and there's something a little bit illicit to the whole idea of ooh, I'm listening to stuff that maybe other people can't listen to, but because it's a Broadway show, my parents were just way more likely to buy it for me than it would be an explicit label on a rock album.
That's 1,000% true. I will never forget. I don't know why Kiss of the Spider Woman is coming into my head. Right. And I remember, because I was a gay kid who was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, to a father that I thought was going to be disrespectful to me. He was not. But to someone I didn't know, because I was raised in a religious family. So I'm like, oh, they're going to hate me. So I loved Kiss of the Spider Woman because it was that quote unquote naughty. Now at 41, it's not naughty, but to the 14-year-old it was. And I remember just listening to it going, oh, they don't know that I'm listening to this, even though I'm listening to this. Same with Rent. Rent was the same way. I was 17. And it was just one of those things going, oh, this is dirty, but I'm allowed to listen to it because it's show tunes. And those have been around since the 20s. My grandmother talks about those, so they can't be bad.
Well, how about a little night music specifically? Of course, Into the Woods was your first. When did you get into A Little Night Music?
So A Little Night Music came shortly after Company, which is my ultimate Sondheim favorite. And it was, I got into, because as I said, Into the Woods, what Into the Woods is, it sent me down a Sondheim rabbit hole. And before Into the Woods, there was, obviously I saw West Side Story, but what it was, I think, with the 70s of Sondheim is the teenager liked it, but didn't respect it, if that makes sense. So Company, I don't know what it's like to be married, but I like this song and that song. And Into the Woods, I mean, not Into the Woods, sorry. A Little Night Music actually had been in my life from the very beginning. I just didn't know it because my grandfather's all-time favorite song was Send in the Clowns. And my mother was a pianist. And she would play Send in the Clowns all the time. She would sing it, she would play it, and my grandfather would come over and he would want to hear it. And I had no idea, of course, it was from A Little Night Music. So much like Sondheim, I knew about A Little Night Music before I knew it was A Little Night Music.
Have you ever asked him why? Like, why is that his favorite song?
Well, my grandfather's passed, and you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. Maybe I should actually ask my mother that. I think Send in the Clowns is one of those songs that as I get older starts to have more and more meaning to me, much like the one we're going to talk about today. Just as I get older, I start to respect it a little more because youth is wasted on the young, I guess. And so as I get older, I start to realize what those words mean. But I'm going to do that. That's a very good suggestion.
Well, I mean, you made a good segue here. The song that we're going to be talking about here today is The Miller's Son, which for the longest time, I do have to say, I always felt was like the weirdest way to end off a show. Now, because I only had access to the original Broadway cast album, I kind of assumed that it was like this song and then like curtain, and it's not. There's actually a bunch of show left after they sing The Miller's Son. There's a reprise of Send in the Clowns and some other incidental music that comes up there as well. But I don't know, like, what is your relationship with this song in particular?
Okay, so when I actually got into, when I got over Send in the Clowns, realized what show it was, I get into The Miller's Son, and truthfully, Little Night Music is not exactly easy on the ear the first time. It's just, it's one of those shows that's not. And so I kind of discarded it as an early 20-year-old. And as I got older, I'm like, oh, he came out with Assassins, and then he came out with this and that and the other. And I'm like, oh, I got to revisit everything. And as I listen to it, I think what it is about The Miller's Son is it's such a older adolescence into moving through that important part of life song that it hit me at 25 in a way that it did not hit me at 16. That's when it truthfully hit me, was in my mid 20s when I went, oh, I know what all of this feels like personally. And I know who this person is.
Yeah, I mean, A Little Night Music, as I've kind of been referencing this entire season, is kind of like the adult show that Sondheim wrote in the 70s, meaning that the themes are even more like you have to have lived a life a little bit, I think, to really fully understand them. I think even more so maybe than Follies to a degree, because at least with Follies, you have some other music that you can appreciate. But The Miller's Son, yes, for me, actually, just to kind of not lose my train of thought here, is a song that I also took a while to like fully appreciate, because I was like, so like, why is this the song that ends off this show? It just seems like a weird choice, but I think the more that you kind of delve into it and then kind of understand more about the character of Petra, like if you've seen the show, you kind of understand she's basically commenting on what the entire evening has been about, but from her point of view, of course, it's still from her point of view. And I think that there's a lovely thing to that of her imagining all these different scenarios of her life while being like so emotionally raw and truthful within the song as well. So I would say it's only been in the last few years that I've really like locked into this song and be like, yeah, I think this is actually maybe one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites for sure.
Well, to give credit where credit is due, I should tell the three versions of Petra that have been portrayed by actresses here in the past. So the original Broadway cast recording is from D. Jammin Bartlett. The 1995 version in London was portrayed by Issy Van Randwick. And then the 2009 Broadway revival, she was portrayed by Leanne Larkin. So those are the people that you're going to be hearing here today. And this is how we start the song. So Petra comes out and she says, I shall marry the miller's son, pin my hat on a nice piece of property. Friday nights, for a bit of fun, we'll go dancing. Meanwhile, it's a wink and a wiggle and a giggle on the grass, and I'll trip the light fandango, a pinch and a diddle in the middle of what passes by.
I shall marry the miller's son, pin my hat on a nice piece of property. Friday nights for a bit of fun, we'll go dancing. It's a wink and a wiggle and a giggle in the grass, and I'll trip the light fandango, a pinch and a diddle in the middle what passes by.
So just from those opening couple of stanzas, what is your immediate reaction?
Technically, we're getting into a lot of assonance and a lot of alliteration.
Yes, a lot of P's.
Songwriting wise, it's quite brilliant in and of itself. As I think when I was researching this, what struck me was wink and wiggle, because it's a very sexual song in a way. It's a very sexually proud song, not something that's to shy away from, but it actually welcomes sexual experiences. Actually.
Yeah.
And I think what I found most incredible about wink and wiggle is the word wink. Obviously, that's how you get attention. That's how you strive for attention. But the word wiggle, it's a youthful word, and it's a very sexual word at the same time. Yeah. And I find that so intriguing. And I don't know if he did it on purpose. It's Sondheim, so probably. And of course, there's always and we're going to probably talk about this as it goes along, but the miller's son, the will go dancing, is this constant shift, but still the same throughout the song. That it's a different person.
Yeah, when you hear that word dancing, it really is almost like there's a memory being formed. Like that's always what the music like reminds me of. It's like, oh, now we're going into like this almost like dream sequence as I describe what's going to happen with this person. Like you mentioned assonance and alliteration stuff that's going on here, but there's a lot of like internal stuff that he's playing around with, like pin and piece kind of work with each other. They don't rhyme, of course, but they work with each other. Wink and wiggle, like they're using the same type of I sound. But then he does this thing where you're rhyming halfway through the stanza. So like wiggle and giggle are doing that. Diddle in the middle are going together there for us. And so like it all is fitting together so nicely. There is a rhyme scheme that is happening as well. That internal rhyming that's going on is also like very consistent throughout this entire piece.
As I was listening to it, one thing that struck me is that we have to keep remembering this is the 70s, even though this is not the 70s. It's still the 70s, and it's very feminist, very pro-feminism, very pro-woman, and this song really falls into all of these things that's going on in the time period in and of itself.
Yeah, well, I was going to wait actually until the end, but just because you brought this up, I think it is important that it is Petra that's singing this song, because I think you could very easily, Sondheim or the other creative members could very easily have given it to Frid, who is also in this show, who does show up kind of in the background as kind of like the guy who's doting on Madame Armfeldt, and originally did have a song in the show, but it was cut. I think that he could have also been the person who came out and sang this. He is also part of the like maid and service staff and sort of thing. But I think that it's more poignant that they picked Petra instead.
Yeah, she's a married. Is she a teenager or is she early 20s? I can't remember.
I don't know what they actually say, but young. She's young.
And I have a feeling that in the originals, she's probably not what you want in 2020 young, but I think you're right. I think it's very important that it's her and not another character.
Here's my question, because this has made me go down this gigantic rabbit hole of research I was not anticipating. Do you know what a fandango is?
I would love to know what I know it's a dance, but
Yeah, that's basically what it is. So we're going to be talking about this again because there's another lyric that essentially references back to this. But so we start this off by what does he say? It's like halfway through that second sentence, I'll trip the light fandango. So fandango is a Spanish dance, or if you're from the Southwest US, apparently it's just a catch-all term for a dance or a ball that you're going to. However, this phrase, trip the light fandango, is not only heard in this show or song. Do you know where else you can hear this basic lyric?
Well, no, but now I'm intrigued.
So I want to be very clear. I do not think that Sondheim is ripping this person off, as we'll find out here in a moment. But that line essentially is also used in the 1967 Procol Harum song, Whiter Shade of Pale. He starts off that song saying, "We skipped the light fandango." That is literally what it says.
We skipped the light fandango. Turned cartwheels across the floor. I was feeling kind of seasick.
What I've read in articles and stuff, they come to the conclusion, just because Sondheim didn't ever really listen to rock music or seem rather dismissive of it, they're very doubtful that he used that as a reference point to put it in. This was Trip the Light Fandango. It was actually an idiom at the time. Like, that was just something people would have said in contemporary, like, mid-1970s. So it's not really of the time period necessarily that Petra is singing in, but it would have been contemporary in like mid-1970s. So to trip the light fandango or to skip the light fandango just means you're dancing. That's basically what that means.
If I can bounce off of this, actually, what's interesting, if you're telling me that it's very 1970s, is it's of the time period, which means if it's an idiom, it's going to be youthful. It's going to be someone younger using it. So how interesting that she would be the person to use it, even though this is, I think it's 1800, late 1800s is this set in. But how interesting that she would use that, even though it's not of the time period that the show is in.
Yes. Now, as I said, we'll be returning back to this because I am much more familiar with the Trip the Light Fantastic. Like that phrase I'm fairly familiar with. So Sondheim kind of uses that phrase here later on. So we'll return back to this to finish off this conversation. But keep that in the back of your mind as we go through that. This is the second piece that Petra sings. She says, "It's a very short road from the pinch and the punch to the paunch and the pouch and the pinchin'. It's a very short road to the 10,000th lunch and the belch and the grouch and the sigh. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and a lot in between in the meanwhile, and a girl ought to celebrate what passes by."
It's a very short road from the pinch and the punch to the paunch and the pouch and the pension. It's a very short road to the 10,000th lunch and the belch and the grouch and the sigh. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and a lot in between in the meanwhile. Celebrate what passes by.
I feel, maybe, I don't know if you agree with me here, Jared. I feel like so many times when people talk about like favorite lyrics that Sondheim has written, this section here gets called up. It's a very short road from the pinch and the punch to the paunch and the pouch and the pinchin'. I don't know if you agree.
Yes. Oh, when you think of great Sondheim lyrics, that one always comes up, and clearly it's the pa pa pa. That is what people are bringing out. But I wonder sometimes if people understand even deeper than that how brilliant. It's a brilliant lyric.
It is. And I'm going to admit something of how dumb I am. I have admitted on this show, but in the past, how sometimes I have misinterpreted lyrics. Until very recently, I never really, I would say, got this line. Because it's like, I understood how pinch was like, you know, you're pinching somebody because you like them in like that flirty manner. It's like, but why would you punch them? I always envision like punch being like an actual physical like punch of someone. But I'm actually kind of 100% sure they mean like punches in the drink. So from the pinch and the punch that you're drinking and then et cetera, et cetera. And then when I heard that, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes way more sense in this entire lyric.
Yeah. I think also what's so brilliant about this lyric from a character standpoint is it actually shows you she's deeper than she may seem to be as someone who is like early 20s, older teens. Because she's thinking. There is a deep thought in here, right? She's going, you know what? Before I get the paunch, and before I get the pen, and at 41, I totally respect the paunch. But before I get the paunch and the pension, you know, there's other things to do as you go on in the lyrics. And I think what it shows about the character is that she's much deeper than just some flighty youth. She's thinking. There's thoughts.
Well, for me too, again, because this is a female singing this, I think that there is a little bit of that like sexual liberation that's going on here too, which is like, hey, you know, at a certain point, I am going to be old, and the reality is that you become less desirable usually as the older you get. So why not have my fun now and enjoy it, and then enjoy old age when I get to that as well. And I think, honestly, that's actually a fairly progressive message in this show that is set in the early 1900s, where it's doubtful that women would have even tried to have that conversation in polite society.
Well, and we also have to keep in mind that it's also, where is this? It's not, I'm going to say the Netherlands, but I'm not the geographic genius.
Well, it's supposed to be Sweden. Okay,
so the way I view that part of the world is a little more progressive than the other part of the world. I may be wrong, but I think what's interesting, it doesn't even matter what part of the country you're from. It doesn't even matter where you come from. It's an early 20-year-old. And this is what all of us go through, which is, oh my gosh, I know I want experience, especially millennials. What a millennial song.
Yeah, really.
And as a very older millennial, I can tell you I went through this where it's like, no, I don't want to commit to you because there's all these other good looking people over here that I'm ready to go for. And
yeah.
I just think it's so brilliant and shows the depth of the character, and she's not a throwaway.
Might I suggest an update to the lyrics where she could sing, "Or I shall marry the podcast host"?
I think that
would be truly the most millennial of...
It would be. I don't know how well it would go in 1900s Sweden,
right.
But
doesn't quite make sense. But any other parts of the lyric that you want to call out here?
I don't know why it's sticking out to me, and maybe you can tell me. It says there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, which is something she does repeat, which is very interesting to me because she's like, it doesn't go off from what we've said, but before I have kids, before I deal with the children of the world, before everything in the world changes, I'm going to kiss as many people as I want. I find it such an interesting song for sexual liberation, and something that, even though it was going on in the 1970s, I feel is going on in 2021, still to this day, is this wanting to be free, to be everything you want to be.
What I think has always stood out to me is that both of them are plural. And I think that that's a very intentional thing, right? There are mouths to be kissed, meaning multiple partners, before mouths to be fed, which means multiple children.
Yeah.
And because you could very easily, within the same meter, be like, there's a mouth to be kissed before a mouth to be fed. So you could have made the singular work, but we've chosen not to do that. And I think that's also important.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question, actually?
Yeah.
So this one has always confused me. The 10,000th lunch, I get that. Thank you, company. And the ladies who lunch, I get that. And the belch and the grouch and the sigh. So I clearly know that there's clearly a growth here that's happening, but I don't know what the growth is. What is your interpretation of the belch and the grouch and the sigh?
Well, I think that's all like of one thing. So to the 10,000th lunch, and with that 10,000th lunch comes a belch or grouch and a sigh, meaning that like the older you get, right, the more complacent you get, and like that's kind of all you get. There's no like the fire might not be there in the relationship anymore, so that's kind of all that you're left with. The old crotchety old men that you have to put up with.
I love it. Yes. Okay. Good deal.
Well, she continues on by singing, "Or I shall marry the businessman, 5 fat babies and lots of security. Friday nights, if we think we can, we'll go dancing. Meanwhile, it's a push and a fumble and a tumble in the sheets, and I'll foot the Highland fancy, a dip in the butter and a flutter with what meets my eye."
Or I shall marry the businessman. 5 fat babies and lots of security. Friday nights, if we think we can, we'll go dancing. Meanwhile, it's a push and a fumble and a tumble in the sheets, and I'll put the Highland fancy, a dip in the butter and a flutter with what meets my eye. It's a very short...
So, I think it's... I don't know. It's not super hidden or in the lyrics here at all, but I mean, it's this envisioning of the businessman is a much different life than with the miller's son, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. To me, the miller's son means she talks about pin her hat on a nice piece of property. I'm going to guess, because I wasn't born in 1900, but I'm going to guess what that means is that though you have the miller's son, you're still going to have to do something. You're still going to have to bring in money somehow. You're still going to have to work somehow. Now we have a businessman, and right away she talks about fat babies and security. It's a very different kind of world she's setting herself in.
Yeah, I think there's the two different ends of the spectrum here currently, which is like, the trade-off is if I go with the miller's son, you know, the person who's grinding grain, that's what the miller would be doing, making flour probably. So you have a large tract of land, which it comes with its own like pros and cons, but you know, you're a little bit more like free, you have a lot of space for you. Or the trade-off is security, because you don't have to worry about like weather or pests getting into the grain or that sort of thing. It's a little bit more of a safe lifestyle, but with the trade-off of it being like you have maybe way more children, you have you're probably going to be living in the city, which is again another pros and cons and stuff going on there. So I think there's an interesting duality that's going on here of the trade-off.
For sure. I think it's also important to mention the we'll go dancing, which is the thing that keeps repeating, is the we'll go dancing. And later on, we'll go dancing. But this time, it's if we think we can, right? Whereas before, it's like, this is what we're going to do on Friday night because we need fun. We need to get out. We need to do things. But now with the businessman, she's like, well, if we have time.
That's the thing, right? Like for me, what's interesting, and we'll see this the third time it comes up, it's the first time when she's with the miller, it's for a bit of fun, we'll go dancing, right? So this is how we like have fun. Like we're going to go kick off our shoes and go. And with the businessman, you're right. We are, if we think we can, right? If we actually have time to go dancing, then we'll go dancing. But it is not a foregone conclusion that that's actually going to be something that happens. Where with the miller, it's like, no, we're going to go dancing for sure.
Well, because she has 5 fat babies. So who knows?
Well, I know. Who's going to look after these 5 fat babies?
Right. Someone's got to do something.
I do love I will say this with lyrics that I like the sound of, and a tumble in the sheets and I'll foot the Highland fancy. I just think is a fun little turn of phrase. Unless you have a different interpretation, what I've always thought that means, and doing a quick bit of research, I'm pretty sure I'm right, which is she'll herself do some Highland dancing, which is, Scottish dancing, basically. But that's what a Highland fancy seems to be in reference to, unless you have a different thought on that.
No, not at all.
A fun little fact for the people keeping score at home, my aunt was actually a Highland dancer for many years. So you have to dance over swords. It's quite a thing.
That's incredible. What about a dip in the butter?
Well, yeah, this is the one that I always had a bit of a conundrum over, I suppose. Like, I'm assuming like butter at the time was probably very expensive is what or maybe not expensive, but like you didn't like overuse it either because it was a lot of work to get it. So I think it's like dipping into the larder and grabbing as much butter as you want. That's what I'm guessing. Like that's they're going out and enjoying themselves. So why not help yourself to that? I don't know, unless you have a different interpretation.
Truthfully, I don't know. But as I'm looking at this, it's coming right after Highland Fancy. And I'll foot the Highland Fancy, a dip in the butter. So it seems like a dip in the, I don't know, a dip in the excitement, a dip in the I don't know, butter tends to, and because it then goes on and says, in a flutter with what meets my eye. So it's adding on to the butter because it says and, right? So, and to flutter with what meets my eye. So it's like, I'm going to flirt with whatever attracts me, whatever enthralls me.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure someone who knows will like reach out to us, because maybe there's like just a very obvious thing that I'm not picking up on.
Yeah.
But I always thought of him like that being taken very literally, like they're actually gonna dip something into butter, but maybe not. It could be a more poetical phrase that they're trying out. So Petra continues on. She sings, "It's a very short fetch from the push and the whoop to the squint and the stoop and the mumble. It's not much of a stretch to the cribs and the croup and the bosoms that droop and go dry. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and there's many a tryst and there's many a bed to be sampled and seen in the meanwhile, and a girl has to celebrate what passes by."
It's a very short fetch from the push and the whoop to the squint and the stoop and the mumble. It's not much of a stretch to the cribs and the croup and the bosoms that droop and go dry. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and there's many a tryst and there's many a bed to be sampled and seen in the meanwhile. And a girl has to celebrate what passes by.
I have to say it, but I mean, the bosoms that droop and go dry has to be some great imagery that he utilizes.
Such a brilliant line. It's the one that definitely stands out in the part that you just read. Just this constant idea of babies, of having children, of having a family versus what'll happen before then. I'm going to take a side note right here, and you can totally cut this out if you want.
Sure.
Do you know the show On the 20th Century?
I have heard of it, but I have not watched it.
So it's a Cy Coleman show, and I'm going to take a very little sidebar. There's a song called Repent, and in it, and I don't know if it's a nun, but it's a very religious woman, talks about she knows what you've done. She knows what you've done. She knows what you've done. And at the end of the song, she says, "I'm so glad I got to do all of that before I became a nun," which is kind of the joke of the song. And this reminds me a little bit of that, where it's like, before I become the mother, the wife, the stay-at-home wife, the very early 1900s wife, before I do any of that, I want to fulfill everything that's in my desire.
I'm so glad I didn't hear it until I did it all. Repent, though sinning may seem swell. Reform, recant, return, renounce, repent, or go to hell.
And this push and the whoop to the squint and the stoop and the mumble, I mean, that's just, it's brilliant because he's not saying anything and yet saying so much of everything.
Well, yeah, he's just using like the most evocative language to communicate kind of a simple idea, I'll admit, but it's just that way that he's putting all those words together that's like, ooh, that hits home a little bit.
Yes. Well, and maybe it's a simple idea to someone of her age. But I think for me at 41, I look at this and I go, wow, it's put so simply, but there's nothing there. It's like I said earlier, youth is wasted on the young, right? So we look back at, I'm 41. So I look back at it and I go, oh, all of the things I could have done, I should have done, I would have done if I had the bravery to do it.
Well, like I'm very quickly approaching my 40th birthday. So I kind of take a step back and take a look at that and be like, 40 years is both an incredibly long period of time and yet a very, very short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And I think that that's what's hitting home here is like, why should I waste my time when I am in my young phase? Let's enjoy what I'm able to do while I can still do it. It's like, I actually even look at my parents and their kind of big regret they keep telling me is that, we should have traveled a little bit more. And because now we're older and it's like, A, we just don't want to anymore. And B, it's like one fall or something overseas and that just kind of wrecks everything. So that's why they always encourage me to travel as much as I can now, because the older you get, the harder and probably the less likely it's going to happen.
Well, and I think that's, I mean, we have to look at all of these songs at two levels, right? We have to look at them within the storyline that they are trying to complement, but we also have to look at them on a personal level, because that's what theater is. Theater is watching something and saying, I see it for what it is up on the stage, but I love it for what it means to me personally. And I think that's what's so brilliant about this song, is because even though it's brilliant to the character in and of herself on the stage, there is still a part of it as someone who is older than this character who looks back and goes, you have no idea, but you wishing it doesn't mean you're going to get it. So at 41, I'm like, do it, go for it, do it. But, at 25, would I have? At 20, would I have? And I think that's what's so brilliant, is that this song complements the character. But me as someone now older looking at it goes, oh, Petra, come on. You're not supposed to be married. You got to live life. You got to do this. You got to do that. Truthfully, I'm sorry, now that I think about it, Company and A Little Night Music both do that, right? They mean one thing to us when we're younger. And then as we get older, we look back. And these are the two shows primarily that I look at and I go, oh, they mean something so different to me when I'm older. And I have a feeling as I get older, Follies will do the same thing.
Yeah, well, that's why I keep returning to this. Like, this is the book that I now want to kind of write, which is how linked, not musically, but how linked thematically Company, Follies, and A Little Night Music really are. Because one is like a person struggling to understand what relationships even are and how he fits into them. One is like at the very bitter end of relationships, and like the cynicism and pessimism of what happens if you let things fester for too long. And then you have A Little Night Music, which is kind of your in between, which is like finding the right person to match you, and like how different ages kind of respond to relationships. So I mean, there's a lot to be said about how they all kind of link up together.
For sure.
And kind of what I like too about A Little Night Music, it's like the one of the three that's like, you know what, you can actually still find love at an older age, and it's not too late to, rectify quote unquote a mistake that you might have made before.
Well, I think also what's brilliant about A Little Night Music is that I read the script pre-COVID when we were talking about this, so I'm trying to remember a lot of the plot, even though I've seen the movie. Is that what I think also A Little Night Music says, yes, you can do it at whatever age, but are you still going to achieve those goals if you're 40? Because now I'm at, give me the Desiree and
Frederick.
Yes, their age. I'm now closer to their age. So I sit back and go, so will you give in? So will you do it? This woman is trying to sing about taking advantage of life's experiences. And here are these two people that are kind of resisting each other, even though they're drawn to each other at the same time. So it's almost like they're not living the lyrics of this song in and of itself.
Right. Well, here's how Petra continues on. She says, or I shall marry the Prince of Wales, pearls and servants and dressing for festivals. Friday nights with him all entails, we'll have dancing. Meanwhile, it's a rip in the bustle and a rustle in the hay, and I'll pitch the quick fantastic with flings of confetti and my petticoats away up high.
Or I shall marry the Prince of Wales, pearls and servants and dressing for festivals. Friday nights with him all entails, we'll have dancing. Meanwhile, it's a rip in the bustle and a rustle in the hay, and I'll pitch the quick fantastic with flings of confetti and my petticoats away up high. It's a very short way from the thing that's for fun.
What do you have to say about that?
Oh, can't get any bigger than the Prince of Wales. First off.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing this up, because there's actually a bit of a comparison I want to make. And this was actually brought up by a previous guest, which is that I think that there is a comparison that can be made between The Miller's Son and Liaisons. Because both of those songs feature a woman singing. One about actual affairs she's had, and this one about imagined affairs that she could have in the future. But there's a step up that happens here. We have the miller's son, the businessman, the Prince of Wales, right? Huge. Whereas in Liaisons, you actually kind of hear her story about how she kind of went from, we'll say it like nothing to like owning her own property sort of thing, right? You have the Baron de Signac, then you have the Duke of Ferrara, and then the King of the Belgians. So you're going up from a baron all the way up to a king in her talk. So I think it's actually interesting that Sondheim returns to that thought process of the three different steps you can take up to higher class society.
Oh, I have to give Liaisons a second listen. It seems like I've never thought of that. That's such a good point. I think also what's interesting in this part is it goes out of her control. Mm-hmm. So in the first two mentions, she talks about kids. She talks about going because for a Friday night we'll have fun. But here she actually says he's going to be in tails. And then she says, what's the other line?
Well, the thing that really calls out to me, honestly, is the "we'll have dancing." Really, so to me, that's like there's really no love in this relationship, but at least we'll have our dancing with each other. Like that's where the intimacy is actually going to happen.
It's not a dancing of choice. Whereas in the past, it's been like, you know what, for Friday night, we're going to need fun, so we're going to go dancing. And then when I'm with the businessman, we're going to, you know what, if Friday night happens to be open, we're going to go dancing. Whereas here, she actually loses power. She actually relinquishes power to this Prince of Wales, which I found interesting. I don't know if it's intended, but it's the first time she actually says he's going to be in tails. He's going to be the one doing this. We'll have to go dancing. We'll have to do this. And I find that so intriguing because though this is the top of the three, in a way, she actually loses power. In fact, what's happening is she's getting men of power and she herself is losing power as she also goes up. And I find that intriguing, truthfully, about this song.
Well, and that's a hidden thing. Like what we've also brought up here previously in the show is like, how would you respond to this song, first time watching this live in a theater versus how do you react to this song after like the 90-second listen and you're analyzing the lyrics like I am and like diving deep and like, what is this? What does the mean in this sentence? You know what I mean?
Well, and to bring it in even into modern world, let's use Meghan Markle as a great example. Here she is, someone who married a prince. And in my view, of course, she's not a best friend of mine, but in my view,
you don't know Meghan?
No. I mean, she's a third cousin 5 times removed, but no, but take her as an example. She married a prince and it seems like she didn't get, I assume there was power being relinquished from her and she wasn't fond of that, nor should she be. And so she had to make a strong choice. And I find that kind of mimicked here. Actually, she doesn't have a choice. She doesn't have the ability to make decisions.
Yeah, no, I see that. And I think that Petra is knowledgeable of that. It's like, hey, I get a lot, but I'm also giving a lot of my personal freedom away by going up in station at the same time. Okay, let's return back to our conversation about fandangos and fantastics. Because here, this is what really put me into a tailspin. Because if you have the book, Finishing the Hat, where Sondheim lists all his lyrics out, this lyric, and I'll pitch the Quick Fantastic is capitalized. And so I'm like, I don't know what that's in reference to. Highland Fancy is as well, but like it's a name of a dance. So I'm like, I get why that's capitalized. And so I tried to see like, is Quick Fantastic another dance? Is it something else? It doesn't seem like it. So I actually don't know why it's capitalized, but it is. However, the Trip the Light Fantastic that I know, do you actually know the first time Trip the Light Fantastic was used?
I do not.
Well, let me take you back to 1645, because apparently it's a line in Milton's L'Allegro, and it goes, "Come and trip it as ye go on the light fantastic toe," is what he says. It became a phrase. So to trip the light fantastic means to dance nimbly or lightly, or to move in a pattern to musical accompaniment. And so it was also, Trip the Light Fantastic was also used in this song in 1894. I'm sure you're familiar with The Sidewalks of New York, music and lyrics by Charles B. Lawler and James W. Blake.
East side, west side, all around the town, the tots sang ring a rosy, London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and Mamie roared, tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York.
So this was very much, there's a history of this term. However, he sometimes doesn't use that. He, like, Trip the Light Fantastic was something that would have been kind of known. Fandango would have also been used kind of interchangeably with that, from what my understanding is. But here he's kind of, using different idioms against themselves. So I'll pitch the Quick Fantastic instead of Trip the Light Fantastic. So he's playing around with language a little bit. That's my best understanding of what's going on here. But I don't know if you have anything else to say.
I don't know if I have anything to add, but even as I'm listening to you, I find it interesting that she's talking about, I'll pitch the Light Fantastic, which is almost like I'm in control, right? If I'm pitching something, I'm not so much in control, but I'm offering the suggestion, I guess. I don't know exactly how to word it, but it's funny you bring that up, that it's in capitalized, which, what does that mean? I really want to know what that means.
Yeah, I really want to know what it means too. So I'm really hoping that someone's going to be like, you dummy, like, this is what the Quick Fantastic means. Obviously, everyone knows what this is. And I just want to know, like, is it meant to be capitalized? Is it a mistake? Like, I just really want to know what that's actually in reference to.
The only reason I say it's not a mistake is because they're both capitalized.
The only other thing I'll just say is I get a real intellectual chuckle, I guess, out of the fact that, like, confetti and petty are kind of like internally rhymed there in petticoats. I just like that he was able to utilize that very quickly.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, here is how the song ends. It goes, "It's a very short way from the fling that's for fun to the thigh pressing under the table. It's a very short day till you're stuck with just one, or it has to be done on the sly. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and there's many a tryst and there's many a bed. There's a lot I'll have missed, but I'll not have been dead when I die, and a person should celebrate everything passing by, and I shall marry the miller's son."
It's a very short way from the fling that's for fun to the thigh pressing under the table. It's a very short day till you're stuck with just one, or it has to be done on the sly. In the meanwhile, there are mouths to be kissed before mouths to be fed, and there's many a tryst and there's many a bed. There's a lot I'll have missed, but I'll not have been dead when I die. And a person should celebrate everything passing by. And I shall marry the miller's son.
Now, I know you have a huge connection to this last bit of the song.
Yes. So I know that everyone loves pinch and paunch and pension and all those wonderful beat words. But my personal favorite, one of my personal favorite Sondheim lyrics is this one. It's when he says, "There's a lot I'll have missed, but I'll not have been dead when I die." And I'm going to take it even out of the show and take it personally as just me as a human being. It's just, it speaks to me so much. It's like, did you go after it? Did you believe in yourself enough to do something? We only get one go round, and I assume we only get one go round. So did you achieve everything that you wanted to? Did you go after it all? And that lyric just speaks to the deepest part of me, and probably wouldn't have done 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's such a cutting line, right? Because, like, there's the two kinds of deaths, I guess, that you'll have inside your life. Your actual physical death where your body dies. But there's also the kind of like that death where it's like you realize, you know what? I don't get to do all the stuff that I want to do anymore because I physically can't. So there's a bit of you that dies at that point, and then there's the actual physical death that you have later on. I think the more depressing one is the first one, where it's like I've reached a stage where I actually cannot do all the stuff that I want to do anymore. And it's such a horrible thing to come to that point and be like, yeah, I have regrets now. It's one thing to get to that and like, you know what? I don't have any regrets. Yeah, I can't do what I want to do, but at least I did everything that I wanted. But it's much more tragic when you get to that point and be like, oh, if only I had tried, right?
You know, I will reference your parents again, actually, and the traveling and say I'm not doing it now because I can't do it as much. And my own parents, who have always wanted to go to Ireland, the last name O'Rourke is not by accident. So my dad always wanted to go to, quote unquote, his motherland. Will he? My brother and I will try, but it will not be of his own doing, right? So it speaks to me so deeply. Once again, there's a lyric that's meant in a show, and then there's a lyric that's meant for me personally. And this one just speaks to me personally, even outside of the show.
For me too, like as this show continues to go on, what I'm starting to notice is like some of the sophistication that Sondheim has, but like how he has evolved as a songwriter as well. Because this idea was actually used before, somewhat, very different songs. But there's that song in Gypsy, Some People, where like she starts off by saying, anybody that stays home is dead. If I die, it won't be from sitting. And that's basically what Petra is saying at the exact same time, just much more poetical and more cutting, I think, at the end of the day.
And if I can add, it's just the word dead is so final, right? When I use it in everyday world, I'm saying they're dead. That's the end. That's the period. But what's funny here is that she's saying, but I'll not have been dead when I die. So it's almost like dead is very active, very much like I'll be remembered. I'm going to have people who remember me. I will have given so many, in this instance, men, memories to keep in mind. And when I find that so intriguing that the word dead is active and not passive, which is quite intriguing and truthfully such a testament to his brilliance. And it goes beyond being able to use alliteration or assonance. It goes beyond that. It's actually saying, I know how to use language in a way that changes the meaning of words.
The other thing that I think that's brilliant about this song, we've talked already about two other instances where there's three things that are being compared. So we have Miller's Son, Businessman, Prince of Wales. And then we've talked about the three different types of dancing that are happening on. But there's another thing that gets slightly changed in the different lyrics. And that's when she says that a girl should celebrate. The first one is a girl ought to celebrate. The second is a girl has to celebrate. And then finally, it's a person should celebrate. So it's interesting that we flip it out from being specifically gendered, I think, in that last lyric. But yeah, going from they ought to celebrate, meaning like in the future, a girl has to celebrate, like you have to grab it by the horns. And then this is almost a little bit more wistful, like a person should celebrate, like you have to celebrate that time that you're given.
Well, and such a testament to the show in and of itself, because what we have here is even in your two older characters, we have someone who is wanting to, but has this Frederick, which has this desire, but is pulling back because he's married. Desiree, who has this loneliness that keeps pushing her forward, but he's married. And we have Lady that's what all of these characters are doing. There's something that's pushing them forward, but there's something that's pulling them back. And here she is saying, you need to celebrate everything. This is the moment where this person is passing by. Now celebrate this moment. And it's quite a testament to the show.
Yeah, and I actually think this is, again, the brilliance of this lyric, because Sondheim is such a champion of, like actors in bringing something to the role and interpreting how they want to. I think that you can actually perform that in a few different ways. And it has been in a bit, which is like a person should celebrate, does that sound sad? Does that sound like declarative? Does that sound like happy? Or like you can actually perform that in quite a few different ways.
Yeah. Which can I ask, which part are you talking about exactly?
Literally, and a person should celebrate. Like how they say that sentence specifically, and actually in the few different recordings we're listening to, it is slightly interpreted differently. I don't think it's actually sung the same way in all three versions.
What's interesting is as we're talking, I actually think you're talking about the last line, and you're not.
Oh, well, that is true too, and that was what I was going to end off with, which is I think this whole end section can be slightly interpreted differently, which is, and I shall marry the miller's son. Like for you, do you think? Not that I love getting into like author's intention, but we'll do that for just a moment, which is, do you think Sondheim is writing that as, no, this is what I've decided to do. I'm okay marrying the miller's son, or like I am depressed because that's probably all I'm going to get in life.
Isn't that the brilliance of it all? Because I'm sitting here looking at this last line going, the miller's son was where she had the most power, but it's also the man who had the less power in the world.
Right.
And so it's like, or is it because of the woman's station in early 1900s? Is this what she has to do versus this what she wants to do? I have always listened to this song and looked at this last line and went, that's a weird last line. And now as I'm older, I'm like, God, I love that last line because she doesn't know what to do. And now let me go back to the 21-year-old Jared who was trying to decide whether he should come out or not.
Right.
And what would it mean that if I came out versus if I do not? And it made me go, would life have been easier if I chose one path over the other? And I think maybe in 1900s Sweden, a woman may not have had the opportunity to do what she wanted in this song versus what is approved in that time period. Yeah, it's such a good last line.
I'd be remiss if I just don't add this in, just because I personally am a fan of the entire album. There's the Losing My Mind, a Sondheim disco fever dream.
Isn't it great?
I love it.
It is
personally.
fantastic.
And they do a version of The Miller's Son. And I'm maybe mispronouncing her name, but it's Eiley Venho, I think, is the singer on that song. And she goes ecstatic on that last line, right? And I shall marry the miller's son. It is so joyous. And so I think that, that's what we have to do. We have to find our own miller's son that gives us a lot more joy in our life.
First of all, I just want to say for anyone who's listening, if they haven't listened to that album, it's brilliant. That I did not think I was going to like it. And then I heard it. Now, oddly enough, it was the Miller's Son that caught my eye. That version is very like, it's joyful. It's prideful. It's like, I'm not embarrassed. It's very 2020 is what it is. It's like, I'm going to take what I want. And I think that's so brilliant. But
well, thank you so much here, Jared. I guess when we're looking at this song in total, do you feel like this is like top song of the show, top 3, middle of the pack? Like, where would you place this song for yourself?
I know we talked in the beginning about Send in the Clowns, but to me, this is one of the top songs because to me, Send in the Clowns is a pretty melody when you're young and is a beautiful, meaningful song when you're older. I don't know if it has meaning until you're older, truthfully.
Sure.
And the only reason I say that, I heard an album one time, Frank Sinatra said that it's a beautiful marriage of music and lyrics. And I remember him saying that specific thing, and he was in his like 60s or 70s. And I think sometimes you have to be in your 60s or 70s for a song like Send in the Clowns. Whereas The Miller's Son reminds me a lot of, hang in with me here, Dr. Seuss. And when I say that, it's like when I'm 5 years old, Dr. Seuss has one meaning. And when I'm 20 years old, Dr. Seuss has a different meaning. And when I'm 40 years old, Dr. Seuss has an even a deeper meaning than when I started. It's not just the bitter butter battle. It's actually a comment on the Cold War, right? It gets deeper as you get older. And I think that's what The Miller's Son is that as you get older, it's not just a pretty melody. It's not just a fun song. It's actually a deep comment on life.
That is actually where Sondheim stole a dip in the butter lyric. It was actually directly from
Dr. Seuss. So
well, then I guess my comparison was apt.
Yeah.
Jared, like I said, thank you so much. If people wanted to stay in contact with you, is there an easy way to do so online?
Well, hopefully you'll have my name, but it's just Jared O'Rourke on Facebook, on Instagram, because I'm original. And then on Instagram, I have several. I have fallen in love with Cincinnati. So I have an Instagram called the Sin City Life. Sin obviously being CIN, Jared O'Rourke. And then I have fallen in love with crochet during the time of COVID.
Wow. Okay.
So it has kept my anxiety down. So I have Rymel Crochet, which is my Canadian mother's maiden name. Rymel, Rymel Crochet.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Kyle.
Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network and to the Calgary Foundation this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. So consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be talking about Send in the Clowns. Don't you approve? As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.